And this is where we were sort of in 2010 sort of thing, where we're making no progress. The paradigm we're using to understand cancer is not useful. And again, you have to go one step deeper in understanding to say, okay, well, we know that there are genes that are being mutated, which cause excessive growth. Okay, we know that, that's true. But what is causing these genes to be mutated? So the big premise of the second paradigm was that it's all random. But there's nothing random about these mutations. Cancer develops, so patient A, patient B, they've developed that cancer independently, right? They had nothing to do with each other. And you can look at, say, patient A, say, living in 1920 in Japan, and patient B with the same cancer, living in 2020 in North America, right? So separated by half a world, by a century apart, those two cancers will look identical. They weren't random. It was not a random change. So what is it that has been causing it? And this is where we are in the midst of a third great revolution in sort of understanding cancer, which is that this is an evolutionary disease and primarily an ecological disease. That is, there's something guiding these mutations, and it's actually a evolutionary process, which is predominantly a response to injury. So when you have a chronic sublethal injury, your body responds in a certain way, and the cell, so if you have a chronic injury like tobacco smoke, your lung cells, some will die because of the injury, some will be okay because they didn't get that much injury, but in between there's this chronic sublethal damage. And what that does is, from an evolutionary standpoint, act as a selective pressure for these cells to become more sort of independent and sort of survivalist. They need to survive at all costs because they're dealing with this chronic sublethal injury. And that's what leading them to act more in their own interest than the interest of the entire environment, which is just like, the lung cells have certain rules to be a lung cell. And that lung cell has sort of, under this selective pressure, has evolved differently to become more independent. So it will grow, it becomes immortal, it starts to move around where other cells don't. And that's what the cancer is. It's an evolutionary process. So that's the sort of really interesting part about cancer. And then, once you understand that and you say, okay, well, cancer is actually not a rare disease. It's actually a very common disease. Affects 1 in 10 Americans, that kind of thing. So therefore, if it's such a common disease, then it's not that cancer cells, like the seed of cancer, is always there, because the seed of cancer is the same in all our cells. What is it about the soil? What is it that is allowing these cells to turn into cancer? So again, you have to identify the cause. In that case, it's tobacco smoke. Get rid of the tobacco smoke. In other cases, like breast cancer, that if you move from Japan, for example, to America, your risk of breast cancer actually like triples. So it's not the genetics of it, because the genetics has stayed the same. It's the environment. And one of those things is insulin. Insulin plays a huge role in facilitating the growth of certain types of cancer. So breast cancer is a classic example, where it has 6 times the amount of insulin receptors. And the reason why is that it allows, those insulin receptors allows it to kind of get a lot of glucose. And that's one of the things that you can now exploit and say, well, maybe you can try to reduce the hyperinsulinemia, which is what causes obesity. If you reduce the hyperinsulinemia, you're also going to put these breast cancer cells at a disadvantage compared to a regular breast cell. You're removing some of that fertile soil that allows the seed to grow.